I mean, from my point of view, we're connected as human beings. I believe in that phrase, we are all children of God and have a right to be here. And so that's my point of view, as I see it, that we have that human connection as human beings. And that's important. So if you look at it in that way, theologically or spiritually, that's a connection. Human beings created by our Creator. And then you can go from there, depending upon your point of view, to include other statements that are political even, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, human rights. There's a lot of talk these days about that, and from the framers of our Constitution, and referred to by Abraham Lincoln. So that's America has conversations like that going on now in some quarters, where there are people trying to go to your very question and say what connects us. So for me, there's a theological, spiritual dimension to that. The next logical thought, it seems, after addressing connectedness would be differences. And then the next one after that would be, what do we do about these differences? But the intervening step would be to acknowledge and value the differences. Even with people with whom we disagree, or acknowledging differences of opinion, differences of religious belief, differences of philosophy, differences of political views. I guess that's something I value in American culture, though we don't always honor it. And we have a sorry history in some ways. People have pointed this out, and I certainly acknowledge that myself, of just violating basic core principles. But the good thing is we have core principles that we've adopted from the beginning that we can now aspire to or recommit to. And that would be differences. That means, for me, religious pluralism. That means differences in the political sphere. And under rule of law, we will have government, and we'll have elections, and we have all these checks and balances with three branches of government to deal with our differences as we're trying to create an order within which we're going to live with our differences. This is all where the rubber meets the road, but acknowledging and valuing the differences. So my personal experience as a mediator, for example, is that I've benefited from talking to the other sides of these matters. And I can recall walking out of a mediation caucus saying, can you imagine if you had not talked to that person, how in the dark you'd be about some facet of this thing? It's a big question, isn't it? Why do we do it? Why do we overvalue some things and undervalue some other things? I mean, that's deep psychology, that's deep spirituality to try to go to that question, I'm sure. We sometimes are fearful, it seems to me. We're fearful what's going to happen to us. Fearful we will lose something we have or not get something we want. So out of fear, people do a lot of things. They can distort, they can fear-based reasoning, fear-based perception, and then fear-based behavior. So fear, I think, is a big part of it, one of the big culprits. And it becomes then a matter of how to deal with fear. So you can look intellectually at things, as we maybe have up to this point in the conversation, about basic principles, basic foundations of respect for differences. But then if fear enters the picture, and or pride and some deadly sins, now it gets interesting. Huh? Now it gets interesting. Now people start engaging in behavior around all of that. And that's where we often derail. So what's the answer? I don't know. The answer might be to acknowledge these truths about fear, for example, and to look at the consequences of letting them operate freely. You don't want to let them operate freely. I once heard a really smart person say that feelings are good informants but very poor advisors. They give good information about what's going on that we can pay attention to and then hopefully deliberate and make some new decision. But if you take the advice of the feeling, of the fear, for example, you can really go in the wrong direction quickly. If we may perhaps clarify in the beginning how we think about these matters, how we'd like to behave, the direction we'd like to go. For example, we'd like to have accepting differences. We'd like to acknowledge differences. We'd like to value individual and minority rights. If we get that clear as a concept, then it's a matter of behavior, pursuit of that, or trying to approximate that, or aspiring to that, and then having some skills to go along with it, and then, of course, some coaches' reminders people who will tell us when we have missed it. And you know, one of the things that intrigued me in the beginning and still intrigues me about crisis theory is that the crisis concept is that sometimes things come to a head in life by virtue of circumstances or who knows what, where everything falls apart. And the old way of operating does not work. That becomes the definition of the crisis. The customary methods of coping do not work. And a person is at a loss and often in big trouble. And when they're at a loss and in big trouble, oftentimes they are open to new ideas in ways that they would never have been open before, or they may never be open again. So that's why the concept is to take advantage of the opportunity for a conversation, to look at the data. But to me, it's in some ways it's a matter of waiting for, praying for the circumstances that will lead to a situation where people are more open to a change. Now, in the world of addiction, they talk about raising the bottom on someone. In other words, instead of waiting for someone to hit a bottom, you raise the bottom. That's what an intervention is supposed to be all about. Many people present information to somebody just about what's going on to hopefully get them to that bottom or that crisis point where they will see, yes, it's not working. But I don't have the answer for that. I just think that we all need to be ready for these opportunities. And often we have to understand that we can't get the change until we get such an opportunity. But there are plenty of them. There are plenty of opportunities around when things have fallen apart and people need something new, some new way of thinking or some new way of behaving, some new skill brought to the situation. In a book I wrote a long time ago on crisis intervention, we talked about 5 modalities for helping people make change. And it becomes a little mnemonic, a basic personality framework of behavior, affect, somatic functioning, interpersonal functioning, and cognitive functioning. So each of these becomes a way of looking at how a person is functioning right now, what their steady state is, what their current situation is. Behaviorally, what do they do? Do they go to the gym? Do they work out? What kind of work do they do? Do they make the bed in the morning? Do they wash the dishes? And stuff like that. Affectively, how do they feel? What are they feeling about things? Are they feeling discouraged or encouraged or sad or happy? Somatic functioning, do they have physical health or not? Do they have pain? Interpersonal, how do they behave interpersonally? Do they listen well? Do they communicate well? Do they negotiate well? Are they abrasive? All these things are important. And then finally, cognitive. What do they believe? What do these people believe? Or what does this person believe now about anything? What do I believe? Do I believe there's a God in heaven who cares about me or not? Do I believe that I can influence things? Do I believe, what do I believe politically? What do I believe about leadership? What do I believe about politics? So change comes about, it seems to me, when a person begins to look at changes in basic functioning. So sometimes it's a new idea that will lead to a ripple effect in the other areas. But the part that's most amenable to influence, we tell people in my field, is the behavioral part and the cognitive part. It's very hard to say, feel better, or feel encouraged. You can't do it. And you can't do things directly sometimes with the body. You can put a drug into it, but that's a behavior. But you can change how you think, and you can change what you say to yourself in certain situations. It's called self-talk. And then you can do the behavior. The Nike approach, the just do it approach. And then from that, other things can follow sometimes. We get into a comfort zone, don't want to leave it. Fear often keeps us apart. Fear of stepping out of our comfort zone, out of our own world into another world where there's a lot of uncertainty. And we don't know what to do. And we are fearful of the consequences of doing the wrong thing or of appearing foolish. These are all things that could keep us apart. Deeply held beliefs can keep us apart. A belief that I don't need other people, that they're not important. That keeps us apart. The deeply held beliefs, and then the behavior to go along with it. And then you throw an incident or two in to prove a point that confirms my view. I told you so. It becomes a pretty tidy package. Very hard to break. Very hard to break. So that's all very efficient, but it does keep us apart. And it has real losses, real losses. So what do? We maybe acknowledge the caricatures and the labels for their efficiency. That's the plus of them. But then we say, alongside that, let's go more deeply, and I like to use the phrase peel the onion, look more deeply as to what people think and feel and what the more differentiating characteristics are that go way beyond the label. In fact, that's the path through which these people in very separate camps can come together if they can pursue it in a particular way and using certain skills and tools to get to a common end on a particular topic. They typically don't agree on their core philosophy, but they can negotiate what they're going to do in a particular subject, initiative, requirement for action. And my experience is that even people who seem to have things together pretty well and be self-aware, they have times when they are just not self-aware. We call them blind spots. That's why we need reminders. We need a prompt. But the self-awareness is very important. You're right. The concept, we need to have the concept, and we need to be able to see some of these things coming, hopefully head them off at the pass, and if not, have someone around who will help us do it. Well, that's earlier we talked about that. I mean, you can point it out, you can raise the bottom on some people, you can do a confrontation. I mean, we might just have the fortunate moment. That's why I like the concept of dialogue. I like events occurring. Think of what happens in a typical week when people watch television and go on the internet. You get a lot of combative stuff going on. So why can't we have increasingly in the environment opportunities for conversation and dialogue and peeling the onion and going deeply on how other people view things? Get some of those events underway in schools, in communities, in religious organizations. That's what we need, I think. And we can do that. That's a part of our public and private life. It does give me hope. I find hope when I see a good idea that surfaces and people act upon it. And there's no prescription for how you make that happen. You can't make that happen. You can just appreciate it when it does happen, and you can live out the elements. That's what it would be. You live out the elements. You can encourage people to live out the elements of listening, of brainstorming, of reframing, of thinking of a new way to do it. And when you see people do it, you can encourage them. We can encourage children for doing that in schools, at home. And we can try to do it ourselves. We can think about that, that it starts with me concept. I mean, like, just do it yourself. Instead of the lament about no one else doing it, do your part. That gives me hope.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate freedom, right? That we can, insofar as we are able, look deeply inside and say, well, this is something, this I believe, and this I will do.